Theresa May has been touring the country and the TV studios trying to sell her Brexit deal. But today she'll face the most demanding audience of all, her fellow politicians. But just before she begins the 5 days of debate on her deal, MPs will discuss whether her ministers are in contempt for failing to publish the legal advice which Parliament demanded last month. Last night, the Commons Speaker granted an emergency debate to be held around lunchtime today.
I have considered the matter carefully, and I am satisfied that there is an arguable case that a contempt has been committed.
If Theresa May is defeated and government ministers are found in contempt, this is likely to be seen more as a distraction than a disaster. A committee of MPs would have to consider what action to take. The government's accusing opposition politicians of playing politics.
I think it's a complete diversion from what the public are expecting to hear. We're going to have 5 days of important debate about the merits of Brexit, the withdrawal agreement. Let's get on with that and stop messing about with process.
What is significant is that one of the opposition parties who want to see the legal advice is none other than Northern Ireland's DUP, and their MPs usually prop up the Prime Minister's minority government. So this could be the shape of things to come. The really big vote isn't today, it's next week when MPs decide whether to back the Brexit deal. But today's debate may give a clue to the scale of opposition that the Prime Minister is likely to face. Ian Watson, BBC News, Westminster.
Yes, as Ian was saying, today's debate could indicate what is going to happen next week. Let's discuss this further with Professor Tony Travers from the London School of Economics, part of the London University Group here in the UK. Thank you so much for joining us so early. What we saw yesterday, we were talking about cliches and the drama of what happened, but having the Attorney General come to address MPs, that was, well, it's historic.
It's very unusual. It has happened before, but it's very unusual for the Attorney General, who is the government's chief law officer, in effect, inside the government, come to Parliament and make the case, really, for why the particular version of the advice that has been given to the government about the Brexit process should be published only as a summary. So it's all about whether the summary is produced or whether the whole document. Now, back in November, the Parliament voted that the whole of the advice given to the government should be published, and of course at that time the Conservatives didn't vote against that, so it went through unanimously. We're back in Parliament now, we're up against the time for the debate about the whole process of what happens next, and yesterday MPs managed to convince the Speaker of the House of Commons, who effectively chairs the House of Commons, that there should now be a debate on whether the Attorney General's holding Parliament in contempt for not publishing the whole document.
But the argument here is that he has client privilege, doesn't he? Because he's giving the government legal advice, and from that kind of context, he has client privilege in not having to disclose absolutely everything. But of course, MPs are not happy.
Absolutely. I mean, what he's arguing, you're absolutely right, as any lawyer would, that there is a public interest or a client interest in not publishing the whole document. However, all the parties in Parliament, other than the Conservatives, signed up to this motion, and there's likely to be some, even Conservative members, very strongly pro-Brexit, who want to see this advice as well. So at the moment, what this is doing is acting as a kind of enormous sideshow to the main business, which is moving on to the 5-day debate, which you mentioned earlier, about the wider process of Brexit and whether Mrs May's deal should in the end be voted through.
And that comes in a week's time. When we're just, in terms of this contempt of Parliament, the building behind us, when we're talking about the next stage, if ministers are found to be in contempt, what happens? What's the process?
Well, I mean, not only has this proposal been put down, but the government itself has put down an amendment to try to kick it all into the long grass. So we are deep into parliamentary procedure here. But if in the end Parliament votes through on this motion in favour of the one that the opposition's put down, then it would appear that there's a possibility, if the process moves forward, that either the Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, or a government minister, probably the Cabinet Office Minister David Lidington, effectively the Deputy Prime Minister in the UK, would be suspended from the House of Commons. And this all, of course, is in the name of getting the full document published. So then the government would have to decide whether or not to publish the document. That argument will still to be had.
And just briefly looking forward then to Tuesday, of course, we've got this week of intense debate once it eventually gets started. Which way do you think it's going to go?
Well, I think what this tells us is that it's going to tell us about the power between Parliament and the government. And if Parliament really does appear to be getting power and getting traction here, it will convince the government, I suspect, even more than people are already, that Mrs May is going to find it very hard to win.
Professor Travers, fascinating insight. Professor Travers from the London School of Economics, and of course we'll be here throughout the day to look at all the different minutiae, and it's a fascinating insight into what has been happening and just how intense the whole Brexit debate has been here in the UK.
OK, Kasia, thank you.